Hi everyone, how are you? Here we are on a sunny, relatively mild day in Marrakesh. And where are you? And how is your day? And how has been your week? And what are you looking forward to? Today, we're going to share some thoughts about self-reliance in a development sense. What does it mean? How do we encourage it? What are its implications? Is it something that denies international opportunities if we're focused on local or national self-reliance? Is it an approach that in fact embraces international cooperation while at the same time building internal capacities and know-how and abilities and planning and control? So does it therefore then give us the best of both worlds, both international engagement and also um, internal opportunities and autonomy? And I would say yes to what I just said, the last part, to the latter. Um, it does that, but let's define it. What is self-reliance? And when we're talking about definitions of these words that bring so many different dimensions and that mean many things to many people, one of the best ways we can define such terms that are really difficult to define is to read or look at the gamut, the range of definitions that are out there, and start breaking them apart into their essential components. And from there, when you looked at hundreds of pages of descriptions and definitions and broken them all down, and you see all of the different the broadest possible range within the time and resources that we have of what constitutes, in this case, self-reliance, we're then in a position to reassemble those parts into a definition that's inclusive of all of those elements. And so when we do that with self-reliance, what could we come up with? Well, this is what I came up with. Self-reliance. It is the use of local human and material resources, the use of local and material resources to implement the decisions for development taken by people. In the process, they realize the problems they face have local solutions, and this realization and the actions that are a consequence of it will break the dependence mindset and increase confidence and control over development. So it is the use of local and material resources to implement decisions for development. And when we do that, we realize that there are local solutions, and that realization builds our confidence and decreases our sense of dependency on, for example, external know-how or external technologies or external finance. The more we utilize our human and material resources and meet our needs, the more we realize that we can do that and impact our lives and not be reliant on others, on the know-how, on the technology, on the finance, on the human resources, um, on any material or human uh, uh, contribution outside ourselves. The more we actualize self-reliance in our life, the more self-reliant we become. The more we use local resources and know-how and our own capacities, the more we realize that that's what we can do, and that realization further decreases our sense of dependency on others. So The self-reliant act not only gives us the benefit of that action, but also enhances our mindset, our, our perspective, and therefore confidence that we can meet our own needs within the capacities that we have. Self-reliance begets self-reliance. In addition to the benefit of those self-reliant actions, we gain the mindset of greater independence, less external control over our lives. Hi, Saeed. Good to see you. Thank you, Mule and Paula. Glad to have you here. And I hope that you and others and myself uh, manifest not just self-reliance within our own being, but also in our surrounding. But let's continue of what it is, of its aspects. So it's the use of our human material resources that we have and that are around us to meet our needs, to achieve development solutions. And that experience creates a greater independent mindset and confidence that we can control our development future, our development course. Now, what else are some elements that we can include? If we are utilizing our ourselves and the materials, the financial and local resources around us, that means that we are adapting our development course, our development actions, the projects that meet our needs, we are adapting them to local factors. And that's not to say that international or broader macro factors don't impact local ones, because they certainly do. But that is to say that the projects will have a certain resiliency because they take on that adaptation to local realities. Local realities being cultural, being political, being material, being um, our own know-how in order to maintain them. And so therefore, if we're meeting our needs based on that self-reliant approach, that means the projects or the enterprises or the innovations that come out of that are adapted to our local circumstances and therefore gain a certain level of sustainability. Does that mean an inevitable sustainability? No. I mean, weather and tornadoes and all kinds of things come into life. There are pandemics, um, national and international economic shocks, trade wars. All kinds of things can come in to our local life, to our community setting, and impact the initiatives that we create in a self-reliant approach. However, we do enhance to some degree its sustainability and its flexibility and adaptability because it emerged through the capacities that we have, the resources that we have, the technical inputs that we have, the finances that we have, the skills and the capacities that are locally available. And when we do that, we have fortified it against certain elements that could undermine its future. For example, parts. We're not dependent on the international import of parts in order for this pump or this project to continue. It's not dependent upon um, skill sets that exist in the capital city. That we are basing our solutions and our development on the capacities that we can manifest ourselves and develop within ourselves. And so therefore, it has a certain adaptation to it. that helps its continuity and its endurance. You know, I would be so glad if anyone shares a thought in anything that I'm sharing. You know, your reaction, you're an example in your life that connects to these points I'm expressing. And so the other part that comes through when we're talking about meeting our human needs in a self-reliant approach is that there will be greater diversity of enterprises or initiatives or projects that we have a diversity of needs. We have health needs, we have education needs, we have economic needs, we have food needs, we have water needs, we have environmental needs, we have happiness needs. We have all kinds of needs in our lives. And if we are applying a self-reliant approach to meeting those needs, that means there's going to be a diversity of solutions or projects that are out there that manifest in order to bring food self-sufficiency, in order to bring to develop a local economy that is able to support health, which we one of the things we learned about in our health global health crisis is the importance of being able to meet health needs in a local way and having availability of the materials we need to remain safe, to be able to have medical providers in our vicinity, to be able to have medical advice. Now, there are certainly national and international roles in dealing with a pandemic that, you know, absolutely. The issues of testing, the issues of being able to um, where where areas that are less safe than others, we need to be able to have a national or global point of view to be able to you know help secure or maintain places that remain safe and help you know support places that are less safe. I mean, we need some, you know, we need that national coordination. Absolutely. But we also need local medical service support and delivery. And so the more that we utilize a self-reliant approach and the more we're able to meet the range of needs that we have in our lives. Let's also say that it is associated with a permanent learning process. So you know, we are not in a condition today, or many communities, most communities perhaps, are not in a condition today to be able to, you know, manifest a self-reliant approach to development today at this time. You know, we need to learn how to do it. We need to build our skills to do it. We need to be able to know how to be more proactive in promoting public health. We need to know how to, you know, have a more an education curriculum that meets the different needs of students. We need to know how to develop a diverse economy that meets all of our different needs and to promote food security. And so the more we embark on a self-reliant approach to development, the more we engage in what is called a permanent learning process, because we have to not just we diversify through diversifying ourselves, through diversifying our know-how and capacities and diversifying as a community. And so that is a learning experience. And so self-reliant development is associated with that. You know, one of the things that we often um, that concerns many developing countries, and certainly when we look at the relationship between developing countries versus more developed ones or more industrialized ones, is how that relationship, the link between um, developing nations versus developed ones, that link between them is one often associated with dependency. And that developing countries can only grow as a reflection of or a mirror of developed countries. So as demand for certain product in developed countries grow, then pressure is put upon developing countries to alter their economy or what they grow agriculturally in order to meet the needs of developed countries, which is often why we get nations growing, emphasizing a few crops versus the many crop. And so, emphasizing the growth of coffee in certain countries or emphasizing the growth of bananas in certain countries, and in order to meet the demand in developed countries. And so I mention this because the more we rely upon or advance upon a self-reliant approach to development, the more we're able to de-link from those external relationships that fashion or forge or create the kinds of economies that grow or that manifest in developing countries. So the more we um, have a self-reliant approach to development, we also then alter or impact our international relationships. And those international relationships are altered in a way that makes the more self-reliant countries less dependent on the economies of developed countries. One of the movies I like to show, if I'm asked to show a movie about that connects with development, is the film Gandhi. And the reason is there's a very stark example of how Indian cotton, went to the factories of Britain and to produce clothing, and then that clothing was then sold to in India. And so one of the ways that, in order to advance independence, one of the ways to do that was to, well, as Indians, let's make our own clothes, and therefore de-link in that respect at least, and therefore let's de-link from the unfavorable relationship with Britain by utilizing the cotton that we grow with our own hands to make clothes with our own hands, and um, not rely upon their factories and therefore create profit for those factories, but not rely upon their factories to to use Indian cotton and 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 then resell that to not just in India and the people of India, but also around the world. And so that's just a crisp example of what self-reliant development can do. But that does not negate, here's an important point. That does not negate self-reliant development. Here, let's read some comments. These variety needs is really challenging to think about justice and equality regarding individuality and community. What do you think about it, and how could? Well, that's a key point. Thank you, Paula. In fact, that's a criticism of and a rightful one of self-reliant development. Think of Paula's point. There are, universal justices, gender justice, justice related to ethnic relationships, human rights, and we can call healthcare a universal justice. But self-reliance creates a diversity of jurisdictions, a diversity of settings, where some areas may not uphold gender justice or the rights of workers or reconciliation among different ethnic groups to the same priority that that a constitution, a national constitution, or a human or an international declaration requires. And so therefore, self-reliance requires a maturity of democratic practices in order to avoid discrepancies in the application of universal human rights. A, a more certain extension of self-reliance will be that a diversity of regions within a country. And how do we guarantee within that diversity of jurisdictions, how do we guarantee that everyone receives a minimum wage that's based on fairness and the rights of workers? Or how do we guarantee that there isn't a discrepancy in payment between men and women, or between different ethnic groups? Or we have to have a standard of justice, and in a self-relying context, that standard of justice requires an established, mature level of democratic practices. And if it is not there, that level of entrenched democracy that's genuine and real, if it's not there, then there is a likelihood that we will find compromises in basic fairness in human rights. And so therefore, that is one of the key considerations we need to have. And thank you, Paula, for bringing up that excellent point. And Saeed says that's true in other communities. Thankfully not yours, Saeed. They can, as you said, but I never give up trying to change their mentality because I can't accept to be. Yes. And so, well, what's important now, we're talking about people's mindsets, and how fixed we can be, and in how we feel and how we view the world and so forth. What's important in a self-reliant approach to development is that it does require people to act upon their self-interest. So we can't we can't expect people, we can't expect ourselves to exist solely or more strongly within a social cooperation realm without consideration of our individual needs. And so the idea of self-reliant development is that we're able to balance both. So we're not asking people to suspend their mindset or to change their point of view before embarking or participating in a self-reliant approach to development. We are asking people to come into the process with your self-interest in mind. What do you seek as an individual in order to make this experience worthwhile for you? What's in your heart for your family, for yourself, for your community, as you decide what's in your heart? And can this self-reliant process, which also requires inclusion and participation, can that self-reliant process meet your individual needs while also meeting social cooperative needs? And that's really a key part of this, because when we look at philosophies and sort of ideologies over centuries, one of the riddles that we often hear and that are embodied in so many of these enduring points of view that we've read about in school is that the individual and the community will always be antagonistic toward each other, that they'll always have this contention, because the more we serve the individual, the more the cooperative will suffer, and the more that we are cooperative and community-based, so too then will the individual suffer. And so this riddle of a doomed inability to meet the need of the individual and the group all at once is what has been a burden uh, upon humanity across time. And what self-reliant or participatory development, what these approaches say is that we can meet the individual and the group needs at the same time. We can have development and promote the environment at the same time. We can have justice and growth at the same time. That one advancing on one need not necessarily deny the other, but it does require uh, dialogue. It does require negotiation. It does require a level of persistent energy and dedication, you know, and a willingness to work through conflict and not walk away. Not to suspend your individual interests, that's not required. Not to suspend the needs of the group or the cooperative element, that's not required. But it does require an engagement among the parties to reconcile these diverse, sometimes divergent interests, but that can be made to be aligned and brought along together. And frankly, you know, I learned that in my first years in Morocco, working at the you know, the Toubkal National Park in the early '90s, where development and environment, um, now it's a hard thing to achieve, and it takes a lot of time, and the process is up and down, and the process could even be dangerous. But that but as a result, we did see and we do see around the world that development and environment are reconcilable interests. And so therefore, and that we also see in self-reliant projects and in community projects, we do see a level of individual dedication because their needs are being met, but a project that's able to meet multiple needs simultaneously. But it takes, you know, a level of committed dialogue and a mediator or a third party facilitator to assist that dialogue, and it's hard work, but entirely achievable. And we're not at the point of saying anymore that this is theoretical. There are too many global examples, and there's too much of a preponderance of evidence to say that we can do it, that the individual need not be compromised for the sake of the many, and the many can still be fulfilled, and the many can still be, you know, not denied because of the satisfaction of the individuals. Anyway, so but thank you, Paula, for and Saeed for um, catalyzing that point. But let's also say this: self-reliant development does not mean that we cannot benefit from external finance. We can. As long as that external finance is used to implement an initiative that promotes local know-how and local capacities and local ideas and meeting local needs. That how do we use, and the High Atlas Foundation does this all the time, you know, in every project. How do we use support from the United States government? And we're so grateful to all the different agencies within the U.S. government that support the projects of the Moroccan people, the Farmer to Farmer program, the OES, Oceans Environment, International Environment Scientific Research, the Middle East Partnership Initiative. You know, there have been a number of U.S. Embassy related grants that we use to achieve self-reliant growth of the Moroccan people. And that growth is not dependent upon continued external financial investment. That we use international support to achieve and meet local needs that's non-dependent on external human resources, on external material support, and that those local projects are self-generating the revenue it needs for its own continuity. That it is financially viable without ongoing external support. So we can use external support to achieve self-reliant growth. And that's really, if you're managing an NGO and you're out there, whoever's listening, if you are trying to create social change within your community, you want to avail yourself of all possible resources, Moroccan, international, or wherever you may find yourselves, private, public. You want to avail yourself of individual contributions, organizational ones, foundational ones, civil, university based. You want to avail yourself of all possible contributions in order to create a local initiative that not only generates for its own future, but also generates for its replication, for its scale, for its growth and expansion into new areas and domains. And that needs to be our goal, that so that in the future we're not dependent on even the initial injection of international finance, that our self-reliant growth grows to a point that it creates its own growth elsewhere in other immediate localities without having to bring in can we use international finance to that degree? Can we use international finance to a degree that not only does it create self-reliant projects here, but it creates such a success of self-reliant projects that they're able to replicate without any ongoing international infusion of funds. And for us at the High Atlas Foundation, that's entirely achievable. And the sector that enables such accelerated, compounded growth is the agricultural sector. That we can grow the agricultural sector by 5, 6, 700% through greater expanding cultivation, through conservation of water, through value-added processing, through certifying organic, through building cooperatives where they can have their product reach more favorable markets beyond the local. And also, self-reliant development doesn't mean that we only serve local markets. The self-reliant development can reach into the most rewarding markets that are available in the world. Like, for example, there's a lot of Moroccan agricultural product that grows organically. Can it be certified organic and therefore exported to the European Union or the United States that pay significantly more for organic certified product? Of course it can. We can have self-reliant growth enabled by the know-how and capacities of the Moroccan people and be able to generate revenue from distant markets as long as that net revenue continues to support self-reliant initiatives. Can we use the net revenue in order to invest further in women's cooperatives? Can we use the net revenue from organic certified products sold in the EU in order to build clean drinking water systems? Of course we can. So in summation, the point here is that that self-reliant growth doesn't exclude or prevent the use of international funding as long as it supports self-reliant projects, those projects through that use of international or external resources, that it becomes self-generating and that those projects are and by and for the people that it's intended to serve, and it's based on their capacities and know-how and skill sets and priorities and local conditions. And further, self-reliant growth can engage in distant markets that are highly rewarding as long as its net revenue, continues to support self-reliant initiatives. Okay, shall we make another point? Let's see, any other comments to share? Great, thank you for answering. So true in those fields of tension you mentioned. Communication is so fun. Communication, when let's underscore that, Paula, that one of the things that struck me when I was Associate Peace Corps Director in the late 90s, and we had between 50 and 70 volunteers in our sector, depending on the time of year, and we're dealing with all kinds of situations, and challenges. It felt like 80–90% of all the issues that we had to address with the work of volunteers within their communities dealt with communication. Well, this person needs to speak to this person, or we need to provide communication with this ministry, or with this members of this ministry need to speak with the communities, so the communities need to get together with their leadership, or the volunteer needs to speak with this counterpart. And whatever it was, whatever channel it always, or relationship, it always boiled down to communication. And that's really it. And if the Phyllis Foundation does anything, it's really that we assist communication, not just communication within communities, communication between communities and their range of partners, and not just local ones, but at regional, provincial, national, international levels. Communication to advocate, written communication, spoken communication, virtual communication, direct communication, but that really is the key of it. And training others to be facilitators of communication. And sometimes I felt that sustainable development is ultimately a negotiation challenge. How do we negotiate? Are we dedicated first to negotiating between the interests of environment and the interests of development, those representative parties and institutions? And if we do believe that we need to absolutely advance upon environmental strengthening in a most urgent way, and yet we also have to meet our human needs in a most urgent way. And how do we bring all the parties together to work out scenarios that completely enhance and advance both? And that's a communication issue, it's a negotiation issue, and it's a will issue. Do we have the commitment to those kinds of processes and solutions that are able to meet the individual and the community and the development and the environment and and between ethnic groups and between gender groups and all these things? Okay, we're at 40 minutes. Let's just make a final point or two. I'm looking at let's say this now. Is self-reliance is also, it's a form of decentralizing. It's a form of creating more autonomous areas within a country, and so therefore, it's that whole center periphery tension that there's a national level deciding the fate of the provinces or the regions or the municipalities, that self-reliant development creates multiple centers, and that therefore, if it creates enhanced autonomy within a country, that's also an approach to reconciliation. Look in this situation in Iraq, where you basically have Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish regions. Of course, there's overlap, but there's also a general concentration of these different groups in different parts of the country, and the idea of decentralizing or a more self-reliant approach to development, enables greater freedoms and autonomy and a greater inclination to not, challenge a national level because we are able to be more controlling of our own fate. And so, and that's the idea. Well, I mean, Morocco's committed to decentralizing. And it's also a way to strengthen sovereign national sovereignty, not just in Iraq, but in Morocco and the United States. The whole idea of the 13 states coming together required a decentralized or a federalist approach, so that states were guaranteed some, I mean, of course, um, the democracy wasn't democratic at the founding of the United States, and so therefore we saw abhorrent, completely uh, anti-human uh, aspects, institutions, and I'm referring to slavery, of course, at the outset of the United States, and so um, you know the 13 states coming along and requiring state rights, which is our federalist system, was also part of that. And so let's recognize that. But and which is something that that is profoundly um, manifesting in the lives of the American people today. And but we will say that the state rights in the United States is really a kind of reflection of a decentralized uh, system with 50 states that have some measure of autonomy, and that the United States would not have been formed unless there was some measure of autonomy guaranteed to the states that joined the Union. And so if we then bring it current today, that ability to bring regions along into a sovereign whole can be encouraged through a self-reliant approach. And so therefore it is a stabilizing, it has been associated with being a stabilizing factor because it allows for autonomous expression within an overall sovereignty. And so, that's why it's also, this idea is also on the ascendancy. It's on the rise in nations of the world, wanting to decentralize, wanting to have more um, sub-regions within a country able to embark on regional growth or more self-reliant growth, because it it gives a sense of greater control that people feel over their provinces and regions and communities and lives, rather than a single distant capital deciding the fate for the whole. It allows for decisions to be made closer to the level of the people. Um, I'm going to look at comments to see if anyone had said anything about that. I feel like thank you, Doctor, for this opportunity to learn. Thank you. Okay, I appreciate that. And maybe I'll just end with a final thought, um, that, I was been looking at the situation in Ukraine, which is uh, moving on decentralization and also threatened by uh, Russia militarily in conflict, in a hot conflict. And one of the things I'm reminded of in that case of why is Ukraine moving so quickly on the idea of decentralizing at this particular time is that, well, when you create, it also enhances defense posture and defense capability, because you don't have you have, um, you're not concentrated at a center. You have now many centers and many autonomous points, And so you become less vulnerable to external, not just control, but external aggression. If you have a more decentralized, more self-reliant, regionally self-reliant country, that means that external threats may be less devastating by being, by having multiple centers and multiple self-reliant locations rather than a single center or vulnerable point. Um, but that's a little far afield from development. Uh, the other thing is, I just want to, maybe we'll end with the point that Paula made, that um, you know, we have to remind ourselves that the national level has to play that role of guaranteeing rights, workers' rights, equality, fairness, justice, and that as regions may enjoy greater self-reliant growth or development and greater control and autonomy, there have to be a democratic um, uh, system strong enough at the sub-regional levels in order to ensure fairness and justice in our lives. So I guess I'll leave it at that. I hope somehow this was helpful in some way. And I guess I'm going to then leave it at that. We'll continue next Wednesday at 4 o'clock GMT +1 in Morocco, and talk about federalism, or just sort of remind ourselves of it and how that may be helpful toward regional blocks of countries, and why that's an important stepping stone in a globalized world. Let's also say that um, small countries wanting to embark on self-reliant development would be wise to do it as part of a regional bloc, because a small country may not have all of the capacities and resources and finance and diversity of inputs in order to make a self-reliant growth manifested in real and those benefits be enjoyed. But doing so on a regional block level of countries then expands the human, material, financial, and all the resources needed in order to have more self-reliant growth. And so, in terms of self-reliance, the regional block of countries also can play a hugely supportive role, particularly if a country may not have all of the capacities available in order to achieve it itself. That it can join other countries, other neighboring countries, in that self-reliant, less dependent, more autonomous um, growing future. So I wish everyone the best, and I hope your day is nice. Take care of yourselves. Bye.